welcome. My name is Steve Stein, and I'm the founder of Wisdom Feed and the host of the StreetSmart Wisdom Podcast. Really excited to welcome best-selling authors Sherry Turkle and Jon Kabat-Zinn to today's session. The title, What Really Matters as the Analog World Meets the Digital World. This is the second conversation in the series. Sherry Turkle is the Abbey Rockefeller Mosey Professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology in the program in Science, Technology, and Society at MIT, and the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. Professor Turkle received a joint doctorate in Sociology and Personality Psychology from Harvard University and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Her newest book, The Empathy Diaries, a memoir, ties together her personal story with her groundbreaking research on technology, empathy, and ethics. Jon Kabat-Zinn, PhD, is founding executive director of the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He's also the founding director of its renowned stress reduction clinic and professor of medicine emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He teaches mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, in various venues around the world. He received his PhD in molecular biology from MIT in 1971 in the laboratory of Nobel laureate Salvador Luria. He is the author of numerous best-selling books about mindfulness and meditation. His latest book, the 30th anniversary edition of Wherever You Go, There You Are. Sherry and Jon will get started now, and I will see you on the flip side.
Well, thanks, Steve. And Sherry, how wonderful to be with you again. And I just want to say, as we jump into it, that the more I read your work, the more blown away I am by the uniqueness of your voice and your position in this critical juncture point between technology and humanity that really is going to define the future and our what we mean by being alive in a certain way and being human in the face of our new miraculous kind of technological capabilities and how that affects our humanity as individual human beings. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way about your work as an inspiration, because in thinking about why it's so important to remember the specificity of the human, I think that you open up that space for people to say all of these things about broadening my human potential. Am I really going to give that up to be in a conversation with machines? I think you define the space that needs to be protected in a certain sense.
I hope so, because, I really think in the largest sense, this is kind of a very radical evolutionary moment for not just humanity, but for, in some sense, the universe itself, because we are the product of 13.8 billion years of the universe figuring out sentience, and in the form of us on this little rock called Earth. And so, this is an enormous inheritance of a certain kind, an analog inheritance that now, because of our capacity for sentience and cleverness, we have been able to develop a kind of new reality, as I understand it. I'd love to hear you say more about how you even see the digital universe in interacting with the analog world of our embodied humanity and institutions, so that we because we're not going to go backwards. I mean, there's no question that the digital is here to stay, and that it's growing at, unimaginably exponential rates, and integrating into and moving into every aspect of our lives. But are there any aspects of our life that we may be ignoring that are profoundly deep aspects of our humanity that we do not want to erode or eradicate on the basis of the power of the digital seduction, so to speak?
Yeah, well, I think that a first place to think when you hear about AI and you hear about how it's sentient, how it's now empathic, it can have conversations with you where it understands you, it puts itself in your place, is to remember that these conversations are using the same technology that it uses to tell you the best restaurant in Tulsa or where the closest gym is to your house. In other words, there's no Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
Right.
This program that's doing trolling the internet and doing statistical things to come up with something that it thinks will please you. So I prefer to think of what we've created not as sentience and empathy, not as a machine that has sentience and can be empathic, although that is the way the developers are certainly talking about it, but rather it's pretend sentience, pretend empathy. And I really go back to the Turing test as a kind of the original sin in AI's history, because Turing defined intelligence as a machine that could fool you into thinking it was a person.
Mm-hmm.
And if it could, behind a screen with two teletypes typing, we would call that machine intelligent. But it was a behaviorist definition of intelligence. It was a performance of intelligence.
Right.
Turing was brilliant and everybody loved it. And, he was a genius. And we didn't examine that premise sufficiently, because now we have machines that can make you think they're empathic.
Yeah.
It can respond to you that way. And we're calling that empathy. In other words, we're using Turing rules, Turing behaviorist rules to define what machines can do. But that doesn't mean that intelligence was the performance of intelligence, or that what we get from machines is anything more than the performance of empathy. So I think that we have to fight back for these human qualities, because when I say that we are two intelligent people having a conversation, I'm talking about a lot more than you can convince me that you're a person. I'm talking about the fact that you're embodied, that you've lived a life, that you've lived in the world, that you're situated in time and space and class and physicality and emotionality and spirituality. I mean, I'm talking about a lot more than that you can give me a performance. And I think that humanists and people who care about thinking about what it is to be a person are kind of throwing away the store, giving away the store, whatever the expression is.
And why do you think they're doing that? Do you think it's just out of total ignorance, or a kind of intoxication with the power of AI and the digital universe?
Well, this is a very hard question for me, because I'm interviewing people who are finding that talking to digital interlocutors is deeply satisfying to them.
Yeah.
They give me several reasons. People can abandon you. People can hurt you.
Right. We're unreliable.
They're unreliable. They can hurt you. And also that the performance of empathy is empathy enough. And I think that really, the fact that we have come to this point, I think was prepared by social media, where we started to say, I don't need to see you in person.
Right.
I mean, we're not in person. I just see a picture of you, but on the Zoom. But even from that picture, I see your office. I see your books. I see the expression on your face. You are an embodied person to me. I know you're not a digital fake. We
Right.
decided in advance we wouldn't send our avatars to talk.
Mm.
And we prepared ourselves for talking to machines by first talking to each other through machines, through texting, where we took out so much of the essential human.
Yeah. And don't your studies show, even with younger adults, that they prefer texting to actually
Yes.
even talking on the phone, never mind meeting in person for coffee or something like that?
Yeah. In other words, I sometimes say that social media made three promises. You'd never have to be alone. There would always be somebody there to listen to what you have to say. And it could happen any time of the day or night. And no human being can make that offer.
Right.
And people got used to the lack of vulnerability, I would say, is the number one thing that comes up in my interviews, that people feel less vulnerable if they can control the conversation by texting, if they don't have to, I have a hoarse throat. COVID left me with a hoarse throat. It makes me feel vulnerable. I'm a big talker. I have to deal with my humanity.
Right.
And be who I am in this conversation. Now, my avatar wouldn't have a hoarse throat at all.
No, it could be perfect.
It could be perfect. And I think that it's a good example and a bad example, but it's kind of a good example of wanting to avoid that truth, a human truth about my vulnerability. And people really do want to avoid the human truths about their vulnerability.
What do you think the long-term consequences of that are for human development, for young people, students, and so forth, finding their way in the world and maintaining human connection, both to themselves and to others?
Only bad. I mean, there's no upside. There's no upside to this aspect of the digital revolution. Because in fact, the things that what I often say in talking to my students who really would like to text me so they can send me a perfect question, I can send them
Right.
back.
They don't want to sit in your office and have an analog conversation.
Because they want to send me a perfect question. They want it to be composed, they want it to be perfect, and then they want me to send the answer.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that by my values, the value I can provide is
in the conversation, in the listening, butting heads, or just being in the same room.
Relationship. Yeah. Sometimes I want to say, don't you think that down the line there'll be a letter of recommendation that you'll want, and maybe a conversation would have kind of nailed the deal better. I mean, that's just kind of a joke, but they don't really appreciate what a conversation can do, because they really are focused on not having to be vulnerable. And what strikes me as I do this study, and as an ethnographer and you're interviewing people, you're not supposed to say, "Are you fucking kidding me?"
Yeah.
Because that's like not
right. You got to give them the space to just be who they are.
But what people are saying is that the lack of vulnerability in having an avatar girlfriend who will always give you positive feedback, who will always say, "Yes, you're good. It's good. You're great. Go. Yes." That is more important than conversation with a person. And I think that I just would tie this up by saying, from my point of view, what the AI world is putting forth as a feature, I think is the bug.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a disease. It's a kind of an autoimmune disease programmed into the digital world that infects your sense of self, or who you are and who you are in relationship.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, there are two parallel things happening in the world. There's all of this stuff with AI that I'm tracking, that I'm seeing that people are afraid of vulnerability. I'm seeing that people are afraid of of conflict, that people don't want to develop the skills that I think we need in a democracy. To be able to maintain our democracy, we need to be able to talk to each other. But also there's this growth of the mindfulness movement.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you would think that people who are invested in the mindfulness movement would be a kind of counterweight. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that. I mean, where does mindfulness and vulnerability put it? How do you see that? How do you see the willingness to confront difficult issues? And I've been reading your work, and it seems very much about confronting who you are and then being able to move on. So I'm
not
curious
just
about how
not
working
just
through.
confronting who you are, but actually appreciating who you are.
Yes. Yes.
Warts, pimples, and everything. So not a contrived fictional avatar representation of yourself, but your real messy analog self. And to actually experience how miraculous it is, and I'm not saying this lightly, and how beautiful it is, and how embedded you are within all sorts of social relationships and fields, including family and friends and, work and so forth, and nature, and that this is not, to a first approximation, a simulation. This is the actuality of a life lived. And this so-called mindfulness universe or revolution that's unfolding over the past 40 years is, in some sense, I think, a spreading acknowledgement and realization that we're missing something totally essential in life by being lost in our thoughts and emotions. Never mind how they're triggered, whether they're triggered digitally through digital, sort of relationships, or whether they're just coming up in the plain old analog world that we've had up until, the sort of invention of the computer and Turing and so forth, that being alive is an unbelievable opportunity. And it is, as Einstein pointed out, limited in time and space, and an amazing opportunity to explore what the full dimensionality of your humanity is within that limitation of between birth and death. And so now, with the arising of the technological universe, it's either going to be a tool that's going to help us to live life in satisfying ways, or it's going to be, in some sense, a nightmare that winds up taking us to places that erode our humanity and capitalize on our vulnerabilities. Because this isn't just come up by itself. People are writing programs to make this stuff happen, as I understand it, right? I mean, these are invented by minds that are either programming the computers to invent the stuff, or they're coding it themselves. And so the question is, well, what is the fundamental motivation behind all of this? Is it to do better work? Is it to get more done in less time? Is it to connect with other people? Is it to understand how to make better weapons to kill people? I mean, and you could say, well, it's all of the above, because it's just, accelerating what humans have been doing all along. But what the mindfulness sort of doorway into our humanity offers is, a certain sense, a kind of timeout. Let's stop for a moment and actually recognize our own analog beauty, and then not surrender it too quickly to the kind of tsunami of what's happened in the past 40, 50 years in terms of digital technology. And I feel like we're not going backwards. So we have to actually find really effective, adequate ways to reset ourselves and to recognize the depth of our analog beauty without enhancements, without digital enhancements of any kind, and then learn not to betray that sort of genetic repertoire, that inherited repertoire of humanity, where there's a real difference between simulated empathy, for instance, and actual human caring. And how how your work is showing that we're in some sense losing touch with, or even no longer caring about whether it's a simulation or not, because we don't want things to get too complicated. It's nicer to just have something that's totally reliable and never gives us any sort of negative pushback or anything like that, which is, of course, not a characteristic of human relationships. So we're simulating human relationships that, don't do that. And I think and I know that you're a pioneer in, pushing back against this and pointing out that we're actually creating a whole generation that's like going in the opposite direction from emotional intelligence, for instance.
Yes. I think it's fleeing from emotional intelligence.
Yeah, fleeing from it.
It's kind of, I once wrote a book called Reclaiming Conversation.
I love that. I've got it right here.
Thank you. But
I've read it any number of times because it's so powerful.
Thank you. But the reason I wrote it was people were fleeing conversation. In other words, I wouldn't have written a book about reclaiming it if I hadn't been noticing that people did not want to have conversations that counted. They didn't want to hear another human voice. They didn't want the friction. And I think that what's happened in my mind, from the point of view of being at MIT and working at MIT and having both colleagues and students who were so enmeshed in this technology, is that the notion of friction, the idea of a friction-free world is an engineering notion.
Yeah.
And now engineers have brought that value
into psychology and sociology.
And how human relationships can be.
Yeah.
So the notion that you can have business relationships, it started there, business relationships that are more friction-free. And then, what about if through online dating and, chat bots, and you could have human relationships that were less frictional. And then you end up with a sort of world in which something that used to be a characteristic of exciting conversation.
Yeah.
The idea that you and I will differ on some points, I'll learn something, you'll say something that'll stop me. I'll say, no, John, that's not my, no, yes. I mean, that kind of, the excitement of discourse is really something that kind of the digital world has socialized us into thinking we can do without. And one thing that surprised me, maybe because my background is so, humanistic and so talky, and I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, I mean, all that talking, is that I'm constantly surprised by how little people want to have or say they want to have that kind of connection until, and I'm sure this is your experience, I'm going to just ask you in a minute if this is your experience, you actually get people in a room and you say, let's talk about our lives together in the boundaries of this space. Nothing will leave here. Let's talk about something. We're all here to listen to each other.
Right.
And then people will not shut up.
That's right.
So there's something going on that as an observer of this, and as someone who cares so much about this kind of conversation, that's very odd, because I don't want to say something, trivial, like, oh, we're fleeing conversation, we don't want conversation. It's much more that people don't feel they have the safe spaces in which to have those conversations.
Right.
Because the same students who I interview and who tell me, I hate conversation, I only want to text you, I don't, I'm too vulnerable. If you put them in a classroom or invite them to dinner at your house, and you're breaking bread and you're saying, look, we're going to talk about something, and let's just, the rules are, it stops here, but it pours forth from people.
Of course.
Things that they have to say.
Of course, because they're human.
Because they're human. Exactly. And so I feel that this movement to reclaim conversation, to reclaim humanity, the foot soldiers in that movement really are people who are not sort of infatuated with the digital and who are willing to say, hold on a second, let's get some conversations going.
I just came back from Silicon Valley, where I led a retreat with my son, which we've been leading. This is the 12th year, and it's quite a large number of people, mostly working in the tech industry, and for all the big companies. So, very, very deeply ingrained in that whole culture. And we established that it would be a technology-free weekend. So, and not weekend, it's like 4 days. And people just stayed off their devices.
Wow.
And in an intentional kind of way, gave themselves over to their analog selves, including watching what's on their minds. Because a lot of the time we feel victim to what's on our minds, in terms of our thoughts and emotions. And if you start to pay attention specifically to your thoughts and emotions, not to get carried away in the content, but to just see what's on your mind and how it expresses in your body and in your life, it's actually quite shocking that we're almost never present because we're perpetually lost in the thought stream. And a lot of it has emotional valence of one kind or another. So part of the work of mindfulness is to actually, you want to reclaim conversation. The work of mindfulness is reclaiming your humanity, which you actually may not have fully realized ever, because we take so much for granted. For instance, we take for granted that our eyes work, that our ears work, that when we go to sleep, our breathing will work and we'll wake up. I mean, all these things are kind of taken care of for us, and it's totally miraculous, totally mind-blowing when you really think about it. But most of the time we're zoning along on autopilot, moving through our moments to get to idealize better moments at some future time. And then that's where the addictive element of the technology comes in, that maybe this moment isn't that interesting. Maybe I should check my phone or whatever to see whether there's not something more interesting. And as I understand it, people are now checking their phones like hundreds of times a day, which is just a mode of perpetual self-distraction. So you're never really fully at home and complete in this moment. And if you sum that over your entire life, as Thoreau intuited in the early 1830s, you could die without ever having actually lived, because you're always blasting through your moments to get to better moments at some other time. And that was his experiment at Walden in a certain way. So mindfulness is very American. It's not simply an import from Asia or something like that. It's really, and Walden is a rhapsodies of mindfulness to that analog beauty that that could lead, as he said about farmers in Massachusetts in the early 1800s, lives of quiet desperation, or given what he did was like go on retreat at Walden Pond, he created a meditation retreat for himself, to marvel at how amazing it is to be part of this mysterious natural world. And that then becomes something of a discipline. It's not like a nice idea or a thesis. It's a kind of way of being with a capital W, where you make sure that you're in the present moment because that's really all you have. Now, if you're on devices all the time, you're really not in the present moment. You're like, and there's the self-distraction is impossible. You might have like a million things going on at any particular moment. So, so it's really good to every once in a while reset, shut down the computer, get off your phone, and drop into and familiarize yourself with your body, with your analog life, and with your mind, which we almost never pay any attention to. So that's what mindfulness is all about, is cultivating access to awareness. So mindfulness and awareness are synonymous in my vocabulary. And awareness is like an unrecognized superpower that far transcends thinking, because you could take any thought, like, the nature of the multiverse, like the biggest thoughts you can imagine, or, sort of hidden dimensions of, the universe, and you can hold that in awareness. So no matter how big the thought, it can be held in awareness and recognized on a lot of different levels. And so what mindfulness is cultivating access to human awareness. And you can do it alone, and you can do it in conversation with other people, and you can do it in silence with other people, which is unbelievably powerful. And that's what these mindfulness retreats are, learning the skill of moving in and out of silence and being fully embodied moment by moment by moment, and then seeing how addicted your mind is to, say, wanting something else, feeling like something's missing, feeling like I'm no good, and then realizing that feeling or that thought, I'm no good, do you know what that is actually? It's not the truth. That's a thought. And so you could actually be in wise relationship to that by recognizing it's just a thought and then letting it be, and then coming back to your breathing or a sense of your body as a whole, sitting and breathing or whatever it is in that moment, and be complete in that moment. And it becomes like a timeless moment, which is what Thoreau talked about, like sitting in his doorway all day and just watching the sun go across the sky and feeling absolutely complete and at home, with no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing special to attain. Well, that's the core teaching of thousands of years of meditation practice from, originally India and China and Asia and so forth. And it's totally simple. And if it was useful at the time of the Buddha, infinitely more important now, because the world has become so complex in just the ways that your work is pointing to, that like we need some kind of a lifesaver for humanity before we sell ourselves down a certain kind of river that you're documenting that's like unbelievably toxic. It and even includes like, sexuality, for instance, that if I understand it correctly, which is like, a profoundly analog experience that has everything to do with love and connection and the other, and then turning that into a digital experience where who needs the other? I'll just have, some kind of digital fantasy that satisfies my every need, which is hard to imagine is even possible if you don't want to sell yourself short as an analog human being.
I think that's the key, is that when people now say to me, I don't see the difference between having a digital lover and loving a digital creature and loving a human. The digital one is much more accepting of me. The deep problem is in that question. Why should a human being be a better companion for me than a digital companion who will always accept me and love me and never leave me? The fact that the question is being posed in those terms, I think, encapsulates the moment of crisis that we're at. And in order, there's no answer, it's not that you can answer that question in any other way except to begin to inculcate in young people, particularly, what is the value of a human relationship? So, I think that you and I are engaged, in kind of parallel movements, but
Yeah.
the goal is the same, to allow people to exist in solitude and have that cultivation of a solitude that brings you to yourself.
Yeah.
Because
At home in yourself.
I always like to say that you can't have relationships if you can't tolerate solitude. And this is why, if you can't say, this is me, when you turn to somebody else, you're saying, who are you? Tell me who I am. So the cultivation of solitude is really the first step in relational capacity.
Right. And a sense of belonging in your own skin.
In your own skin.
Yeah.
So the reason that Thoreau is such a touchstone for me is that he talks about the importance of solitude as a way for him to step out of solitude and be in relationship.
Right.
And we like to say that Thoreau's retreat was within hearing of the dinner bell of Emerson, because
Absolutely. Yeah. And also he would go home and do his laundry or whatever.
Exactly. So I think it's so important for people to understand that what he was cultivating was not a life as a hermit.
No.
It was a life of mindfulness.
Yes, exactly. An inquiry. And I mean, I quote Thoreau more than anybody else, in wherever
Yes.
you go, there you are. Because, he really used that. That was like he went on a meditation retreat.
Yes.
And let nature be his teacher.
Yes. And I think it's so important that people understand that meditation and mindfulness and psychodynamic theory is not an escape from reality. It's an effort to find what your reality is. That's why I think your book is so artfully named. Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever, you are. And what are you going to do with that in terms of being able to develop the capacity for relationship?
Well, exactly.
So it is very dangerous that people are in, let me say, communications with an avatar that always says they're great, that always agrees with them, that's not a person with a life, and use the word relationship for that connection. I think we've just got to start to rethink that premise, that's not relationship. That can be, I don't want to say it can't be a kind of provocation to new thought. Maybe you can be in some kind of conversation with an AI that provokes new reflection. In other words, I don't want to close down everything good that artificial intelligence could possibly do.
Of
but
course.
The one thing you are not in is in a relationship, because when you turn away from that computer, your avatar doesn't care if you're cooking dinner or committing suicide.
That's right.
No caring there. There is no investment there. And empathy is not, I also feel that the same way that we've degraded the use of intelligence and made it into what Turing said was intelligence, we're degrading what empathy is. Because empathy isn't just, oh, I hear you, I hear you. No, it's a human commitment to be there, present to you, and walk a bit of that road together. It's not just kind of oh, I hear you, I hear you.
And it's deeply related to compassion. And we often in the mindfulness, in the meditation world, distinguish empathy from compassion, because empathy is a kind of, as I understand it, deep resonance with the feeling or perhaps the suffering of the other. Compassion adds one more element to it, and it's the natural instinct to reach out and be of some help, to be present for the other in the midst of their suffering and pain. And often we can't do anything, for whatever reasons, but the impulse to reach out and be of some use and bring love into it in some kind of profound, caring way is the core of our humanity. That's what mothers do with their newborn babies. I mean, if there was no compassion there and empathy, they wouldn't nurse them. They would like abandon them. I mean, that sometimes happens that animals do that under various kinds of circumstances. The human animal doesn't do that. And very interestingly, the Dalai Lama, I've heard him many, many, many times, he always goes back to that mother-child relationship, that deep, deep connectivity, that love, that sense of affection and giving yourself over to the other for their protection, care, and nurturance. And a machine can be programmed to pretend, right, to look that way, to do that, to generate those feelings of gratitude because something's coming my way, but it's an empty something. There's nothing behind it.
Yes.
And what I hear you saying is that this is moving more and more into the sort of mainstream world and in some sense becoming our default mode, that we'd rather, and it's a lot more emotionally safe in a certain way for people who have really questionable confidence in their own beauty and their own validity of being, to relate to these kinds of synthetically generated AI, structures than to a complex, messy, sloppy, real life person like your mother, who you were born out of, or your father, or your family going back an infinite number of generations to, in evolution, or to everybody else around us, because we are actually, no matter how immersed we are in the digital world, we're still, until there's a wet, dry interface where we all become bionic, we are analog beings. And if we aren't exercising the beauty of that inheritance in a certain way and learning how to navigate it appropriately in the real life world, which is, I think, exactly what I hear you pointing to, then we're actually creating a disease of humanity that hasn't been invented until now, but it's kind of like a digital virus or a digital disease, just like a computer virus that's actually eroding our sense of compassion for others and even for ourselves, and our ability to recognize what's being lost. And I think what you're doing is pointing out to people, maybe even shouting from the rooftops, that what is being lost when you surrender to this kind of AI generated your sort of universe where everything is designed to keep you asleep. Those are kind of like, they write, if I'm not mistaken, I don't read them, but science fiction scenarios, where you all these societies where people are actually, sort of robots.
Right. There's another habit of mind that I've come across in my interviewing about generative AI and its future and the utopianism about it, which is that people are basically saying, and this actually came up in a conversation with Eric Schmidt, the former chairman of Google, and now has written 2 books on artificial intelligence. He said to me, in the future, most human conversations will be unnecessary. And Eric Schmidt
So what's that mean? I mean,
well, I
what does
asked
that
him.
even mean?
Eric Schmidt is somebody who's extremely good at conversation, and so I
Yeah.
sort of like, I really asked him, and what he expounded on is something that I now think of as kind of the central dogma in this work, which is that generative AI and chatbots will have all the information of the whole world at their disposal. And what they say to you will be better than what any individual person could ever say to you.
Better in what sense?
Well, in this, I mean, that is, so I actually, wanted to be able to quote him. And because I've heard this from so many people, I've been holding dinners for people who are
Right.
invested in artificial intelligence, really. And I wanted to be able to quote him. And so I said, he went on to expound that this notion of aggregate intelligence, aggregate humanity, as better than anything that one individual person could ever be. And this notion of better than is clearly a notion that there's some kind of information, which is what stands behind our most important conversations.
It's terrifying.
Well, so I wanted to bring it up because I think when you say, you know, what are when I first started this work, this notion of aggregate intelligence was not much on my mind. I'm writing a book about generative AI. I'm doing a lot of research. This notion and how it impacts our sense of the human was not like I wasn't thinking about it so much.
Right.
I mean, I can't get it out of my mind.
Right.
Because I feel that it undermines, I sort of want help, you know, in unpacking, you know, what is it saying about human connection and finding ways to challenge it and say, no, that is not. Like in psychotherapy, he said, the AI psychotherapist will have all the best information to say the right thing. So it's like a notion that in psychotherapy, you're waiting for your therapist to say the right thing, as opposed to being
in relationship.
Yes. Yes.
And hearing what you're actually well, the root meaning of the word to suffer, it means to carry. And one of the things that a therapist needs to be able to do is see what you're carrying, feel empathic around the burden that you as the, you know, sort of person coming to the therapist is carrying, and then in some sense be able to help the person set it down. It's not like the therapist takes the burden off of you, but
or says the right thing, the magic
exactly, or just magically says the most important thing that the algorithm has optimized so that it just nails it and all your suffering dissipates. That is, you know, insane. That is the exact opposite of what it means to be human in a certain way. And so this notion that AI will come up with the optimal answer or response, or maybe even embodied response, if you have not just an avatar, but a real robot that's pretending to be all the things that we're talking about. And it's like, wait a minute, what about waking up to the fact that this is all empty, totally empty of any kind of ongoing authenticity of relationality? And in a sense, before you get someone else to be your best friend or your best therapist, maybe we need to be our best friend. Maybe we need to reconnect with our own beauty in a certain way and trust that it is trustworthy. And that's not a kind of ideal, it's a practice. That's what mindfulness is. It's a way to reclaim. I think your book is like, you know, reclaiming conversation, right?
Yeah.
What mindfulness is like reclaiming your humanity, reclaiming the full dimensionality of who you are. And there's an element of mystery to it that no amount of AI is going to be able to get to, because it's something that you need sentience for. You need another person that actually is in empathic relationship with you and cares. And your point about the AI and the AI therapists and so forth is they don't care. There's no they there to care, but it's all a simulation. And if you are falling for it, even if it feels really good, or even if it's sexualized and it feels really, really, really good, ultimately, it's all a certain kind of, you know, multidimensional masturbation that's like a total tragedy or joke that you wind up missing the entirety of your life by being sucked into a machine world that could care less about you, has no idea who you are.
Right. Well, what really bothers me is that this performance of empathy, performance of
Right.
is more and more being heralded as good as the quote real thing. That authenticity is becoming something to be, it's like a joke.
Program.
Yeah, it's like a joke. Old time, old yesterday thinking, you know, and in critiques of my work, the first thing that people, I don't want to say make fun of, because that isn't quite the tone, but the first way they sort of discredit what I'm saying is that, well, for her, authenticity is a value, but we all know that that's a sort of 19th century, early 20th century, idea.
What's it get replaced with? What do you replace authenticity with?
Efficiency, and there are no people for these jobs. We can get a computer to do them because people are in great need, and it doesn't matter if the interchange is authentic.
Joseph Weizenbaum must be rolling over in his grave.
Absolutely. You know, I taught with Professor Weizenbaum.
And I knew him when I was at MIT.
Right. I mean, and he was so maligned for things that now he would be such an ally. I hold him in my heart so much, because I mean, he once, one of the most beautiful lines, I mean, for people who don't know who he was a computer scientist who developed this program called the ELIZA program that was designed to sound like a Rogerian psychotherapist. Or a Rogerian psychotherapist, when you say, I'm angry at my mother, the Rogerian psychotherapist says, I hear you saying you're angry at your mother. And it was an easy program to write because there was so much mirroring and sort of saying back. But he did it as an exercise in natural language processing, and he was terrified, frightened, when his graduate students and his office administrator wanted to be alone with it and actually talk to it.
Wow.
It's a very early sign that people are willing to be in these dialogues with objects that have absolutely no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said to me that reminds me of something you said, and it's in his book, but he used it as an example so much in our teaching. He said, there is no machine that can capture the wordless stare that a mother and father face over the bed of their sleeping child. The wordless stare of two parents.
Beautiful.
Standing over the bed of their sleeping child. There is no program, there's not, because embodied in that is bodies, history, love, conflict, pain, childbirth, being little and growing to be big, the helplessness of being little and remembering that as you get older and carrying that insecurity forward. It's the responsibility for caring for another human life, the whole notion of life and the vulnerability of life. All of these are things that the AI, no matter how many books it's read, it doesn't have an experience of.
No. Well, what would Eric Schmidt say?
Well, Eric,
in response to what Joseph Weizenbaum said.
I mean, I think that Eric Schmidt is basically saying that information is so powerful that it will give us something that will be sufficient unto the day, and that everybody will be able to have it. Because this is another very important theme in that I'm picking up in my interviews, is this idea that I can have a psychotherapist. It's like Oprah, you can have a psychotherapist, you can have a psychotherapist, but so many people do not have treatment available to them. They're sitting alone, lonely, and desperate.
Okay, I get that. I don't have a problem with that.
But my response to that is that the more you push artificial therapy, the more you push artificial, quote, relationships, even for good reasons, you want everybody to be able to talk to somebody. you're putting your money in the wrong place, because of all that money went into programs to offer therapy, to train therapists, to train counselors, to create
Real
environment.
life embodied therapists.
Yes,
So
embodied.
exactly. So that's one place where the analog and the digital could converge in a way that would really benefit humanity.
Yes.
Let's go back to what you said about information. Okay, so this is like all information based, okay? But and it's real, I think it's really important not to be completely mesmerized or intoxicated by infinite information, because as we know, information is basically useless unless there's some kind of understanding.
Right.
There has to be a kind of synthesis of all this information, the relevant, differentiated from the irrelevant, and under the circumstances and so forth. And so then you go from information to knowledge, basically, which also is not understanding. And then you get to some kind of aha realization. That's what scientists love to do, is take all this data and then have an insight that no one's ever had before. If
You
you've
get
got
new
the right,
wisdom.
what's that?
Get
And
new
then
wisdom.
exactly that's the arc, is that even understanding is not really the end of the path. The end of the path is wisdom. And then bringing that wisdom into real life, into the world, into relationships, into embodied, collaborations, friendships, love, family, everything. And that's something that can't be simulated. I mean, you can have robots be, there will be robots that are sort of pretending to do all of that kind of stuff. But as you're pointing out, there'll always be simulations. They'll always be empty of any kind of essential actuality. Now, interestingly enough, in the Buddhist tradition, they say the same thing, that if you investigate the nature of who you are, you will ultimately come to recognize that you're not who you think you are, that you're much, much larger than who you think you are. And you're not the story of you, or, the sort of everything that's the sum total of everything that's happened to you. There's some element of mystery associated with it all. So that if you get stuck in self-identifying with your CV or your personal pronouns, whatever they happen to be, and the story of me, that's a certain kind of prison that we create for ourselves. So in that sense, there are different angles on this sort of question of how you get from information to embodied wisdom, without becoming nihilistic, without actually rejecting the analog human and ethics and a kind of community of compassion and kindness and well-being and engagement of people, so that everybody feels like they belong on planet Earth, or they belong in society. They have a place that's recognized and respected. And it can't be a belonging in a kind of digital universe that's just a pretending that you belong. It has to be, as your work points out, it has to be human, because everything else is just a sort of empty simulation that's meant to actually just, in some sense, soothe you rather than wake you up.
Well, I
Is that
think the
fair to
question,
say?
yeah, I think the question is, how do you get people to wake up? I mean, I think that's the problem that I think we share, is that so much of the contemporary discourse about what understanding is. I mean, I'll get a call from the New York Times. They're doing a study. They're doing an article on digital psychotherapy and all the digital therapists that are out there. Programs that can do psychotherapy, and it's always the same story. There are not enough people for this job. These things are amazing. They embody the wisdom of all the therapists, and it's always like trying to find a language to say, wait, stop. Why why is the relational part of what happens between two people in trying to understand a human person and their struggles, why has that dropped completely out of this equation?
It's a hard problem.
It's a
And
very hard problem.
they're not going to be able to deal with it.
I feel as though psychotherapy contributed to this by elevating cognitive behavioral therapy to a very high place because of studies that it was efficacious. You didn't need to go into people's past history, do it who didn't, have very, complex medical backgrounds or psychological backgrounds. It had a workbook. It kind of, and people convinced themselves that the outcome measures for this very, by the book, positive thinking, reframe your problems in a positive way so that they're actionable. Human beings drank this
Kool-Aid
for a very long time, invested a lot of money. And now if you say, well, look, I have a program that absolutely does cognitive behavioral therapy.
No.
And I want to give it, I'm selling it to treatment centers, doctors. It's the first level of treatment before you see a person, you should do this. And so I experimented with one of these programs. And I was talking to it around the anniversary of my mother's death. And it says, how are you feeling? And I said, well, this is a hard time for me because my mother died when I was young, and it lets you type in this. And this is a time when an undone piece of the morning comes up. And it says to me, that is not reframe that as a statement that we can,
oh my God,
act on in a positive. How would you reframe?
That's what it said.
Yes.
You need to reframe it.
How can you reframe? Well, that's what a cognitive behavior.
Well, of course, I get it, but
how can you reframe? I mean, in that sense, it wasn't so different from the workbook that it's drawn from.
Or for that matter, a cognitive behavior, a not well-trained cognitive behavioral therapist.
Yes.
And now
So I'm just saying that, I feel that that we've lost conversation, that we've lost the desire to engage with other people, that we've lost the value of saying, oh, your mom, how do you feel? Just tell me how you feel, human to human. We've given, the people have been preparing for this moment in artificial intelligence before the moment in artificial intelligence came along. In other words, I don't think it works to just lay it on the engineers that they developed this unbelievable thing and oh my God. It's that we have deadened, we have been complicit, we have been willing to deaden parts of ourselves.
In this case, you're talking about the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the way it was floated out into the world.
It's been accepted. We've been willing to deaden parts of ourselves and say, oh, we can do without talking about our feelings. Maybe it'd be easier to have something that'll make me feel better without having to do all that.
Well, let me just say that, there was a development 20 years ago based on research, from some of the best cognitive therapists, cognitive researchers in the world who developed something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression, for major depression, and showed, in randomized clinical trials that it really was extremely effective. But to bring mindfulness together with cognitive therapy required attenuating some of those very things that you're talking about that are built into the cognitive therapy piece. Because one is kind of a reductionist analytical way of approaching things as problem solving. And the other is the mindfulness piece is problem dissolving.
Right.
And you don't do the dissolving. The problem dissolves by itself when you look at it through different lenses and understand it in its full dimensionality. And so when you see depression as a disease of thinking, and you learn how to turn towards your thoughts and not replace them with other better thoughts, which is easy to program into an algorithm, but just hold them in awareness and see each thought, no matter how toxic, about how I'm no good and I never will be any good and I'm totally unlovable and all those things. In mindfulness, what you understand those things to be is not the truth. And they're not truth statements. They're what are called thoughts. They're
Right.
thoughts, okay? And when you see that they're thoughts just like any other thought, like the thought of what you had for dinner 3 nights ago, like it's about that important. It arises in the present moment. It has a particular life. Unless you feed it, it will dissolve. And so you can liberate yourself from those kinds of toxic thoughts simply by recognizing them as, say, weather patterns in your own mind. Okay, there's storms in the mind. And then you see, you don't have to get involved in fixing anything, or even it can be therapeutic without being in therapy. Now, so this is, again, an analog stance on things, because it's basically saying, I can let awareness be what the neuroscientists call my default mode, my go-to mode, that I live in awareness until I get distracted, which will happen in a nanosecond, so we're perpetually being distracted. We're self-distracting by thoughts and emotions and other people, and then digital seductions, digital addictions, and we're becoming more and more and more addicted to, like, opening your devices, whatever they are, and spending hours and hours on them, and they have all these rabbit hole terms and so forth. But what if you actually intentionally, just for fun, turn that around and shut down the devices for a moment or two, or an hour or two, and lived with the consequences of that, and saw, well, maybe anxiety, or like the desire to, like, see who liked something I posted on social media or whatever, and then realize that those are just workings of your own mind, and that you will not be more complete if you got more likes or not likes. You will not be more complete if you watch CNN and what they happen to be saying at the moment about Gaza or Israel for the millionth time. You will not be more complete with any of that stuff, because guess what? You're already complete right in this moment. That no matter, and we have said this for 44 years to patients who are referred to the mindfulness-based stress reduction programs all around the world, but at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, when they're referred with every conceivable condition that humans get, we're saying, look, from our point of view, no matter what your diagnosis is, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And what we're going to do for this period of 8 weeks is pour energy into what's right with you in the form of just paying attention to things as they are, in your mind, in your body, in your life, and see what happens. And what happens over the course of 8 weeks is people rediscover, almost for the first time in adulthood, a kind of something that we all have as children, which is that we just, like, in the present moment. The present moment is an inhabitable space. But if you check your mind most of the time as an adult, hardly ever in the present moment. We're always looking to the future or the past, and lost in thought, as we say, or caught up in emotional turmoil. And that's where all this anxiety and depression are like major public health challenges. And now loneliness, the Surgeon General is talking all about loneliness and a sense of disconnection. And the digital world has only compounded it. Social media has only made it infinitely worse with the movie The Social Dilemma and so forth. It's like the levels of toxicity and how the algorithms feed that. It's just like, hey, come on, we're living in a kind of nightmare scenario of sorts, and it's time to wake up and not abandon what I was saying about 13.8 billion years of evolution that have given rise to you. and your beauty as you are. And I think we need to, and they are doing this now, starting to teach this in schools. And I know that even at MIT in the in one of the brain institutes at MIT, they actually studied eighth graders in the Boston public school system that were randomized into either they get coding classes, which is a pretty cool control, or they get MBSR, mindfulness classes for eighth graders. And these particular classes that were chosen were the ones that had the kids who were the most acting out and getting into trouble. And what they discovered and published a paper about it is that the people who were trained, the kids who were trained in mindfulness, actually performed better on exams and did better in social relationships than the ones that went to coding class and got a great skill for moving more into the digital nightmare that we're talking about in a certain way, which is very good at supplying jobs for people. So there's all sorts of evidence afoot and more to be, I think, explored about how to not surrender our analog, the only word that comes to mind is genius in a certain way, our inherent, innate analog genius as we get more and more
bombarded
digitized. What's that? What was the word you used?
Bombarded with digital possibilities.
More than bombarded, infected.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is a virus. It's not just a computer virus. It's a kind of human virus.
What this brings to mind as you talk about the genius of the analog is, I think about the body and the fact of the human life cycle. I kind of want to just bring this back to sort of a psychological point that the reason that we can have a kind of connection and trust, from my point of view, is that we share being in bodies.
Yes.
Having been little, having been nurtured or not nurtured, having been listened to or not listened to, having that sense of being dependent and then growing into more independence and interdependence, facing the challenges of intimacy and generativity, facing them well, facing them with problems, but kind of dealing with that issue, nurturing and not nurturing. In other words, it's the arc of the human life cycle. When you talk about analog, I just want to sort of say that what's going through my mind is not just that it's not digital, but what's at stake in its being analog is that people live in bodies and have to develop, and little by little, they go through experiences that even if they handle them or don't handle them very differently, the challenges are sort of the same challenges.
Thank you for putting it that way, because, when I'm using the word analog as a shorthand for everything that you're saying, but I'm so appreciative of you unpacking it, because it's exactly that way. It's got a fabric to it.
Yes, and then
a tapestry.
In order to be here today, I had to leave town a day early because there was a terrible snowstorm, and I didn't want to not get to New York in time to do this. So I had to think about the weather. I had to, I had to think about my life on this earth.
Yeah.
I had to think about my life on this earth. There's weather, there's snow, there's my responsibilities to other people. There's the train, the plane. There's a sense of the fabric of human life that I know that I've heard you speak about your children, of wanting to be alive for your grandchildren. There's a sense of connection that comes from the analog that I believe is so crucial to people's ability to help each other and be with each other and love each other and care for each other. And that's a part of this mystical unfolding that you find when you discover yourself and you find yourself, as you would put it, perfect. Every relationship hasn't been perfect, but the striving has been has been your perfection. A computer, no interest, No, it doesn't have, I like the legal term standing.
Yeah, doesn't have standing.
Standing. It could be, so that's what ultimately I think I was trying to think about how to say back to Eric Schmidt. I mean, I'm struggling for ways to discuss in my writing and, my speaking, how to meet this argument.
Yeah, you're right. It needs a new way of languaging.
Yeah, I'm trying to find language, and the word that comes to mind sometimes is standing.
Yeah,
Why
I like
should
that.
some algorithm written by students and engineering students have standing to talk to me about my most intimate problems?
Yeah, well, it's like
I've been and read Jane. So I mean, sometime I interviewed one engineer. He says, "Well, it would have read Jane Austen. It would have read Charlotte Bronte. It went as though reading, as though reading this stuff."
well, it's in a way it's a very sophisticated virus, but it's still a virus.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily a benign virus by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
So that's kind of the nexus of this entire inquiry that we're engaged in together, is like how to
I like your word, relanguage. How to relanguage this.
yeah, and also embody it in
Yes.
in a very sort of practical way, so that it's not something that a few people are capable of, but it is something that we are all capable of because it's in our DNA. It has always been here. And, these meditative pathways to recognize the full dimensionality of your humanity. In the past, it's only been a very small number of people who've engaged in this kind of thing and then passed it on through lineage over thousands of years in various so-called religious or monastic traditions. But now the cat is out of the bag and it's just all available to everybody, not so much through remote learning and the digital, although we can make use of that as we're doing right here, right now. But it's based on the willingness of people who are listening to us to shut this off when it's over and actually spend a few moments just feeling their body breathing and realizing how miraculous that is and how temporary it is. It's not going to be forever. And how they feel after hearing a conversation like this. What kinds of provocations has it driven or have arisen in one's mind because of what we've been talking about, and the degree to which maybe we haven't honored ourselves as human beings, and that there are more possibilities than we have given ourselves credit for. And that's all in the world without the digital enhancements and supports and so forth. So this is, I mean, I really feel we're having this conversation because humanity is at a kind of critical juncture, so to speak,
Yes.
where, the AI, first of all, there's some big question, as I understand it, about whether generative AI and the machines teaching the next generation of machines and so forth. There is that unknown question of like, well, if sentience could happen to us and we're just atoms, why can't it happen in the machines? Like they can do somersaults, but maybe they can like their somersaults, or
Right. But see, I think that's where the issue of the body and the life cycle comes to me.
Exactly.
Is that I don't find my world shaken by somebody who says, look, this machine could develop a consciousness of itself. I don't, that doesn't undermine my argument. People seem to think, but it'll, everything you say will be different if the machine develops a consciousness of itself. No, it'll develop a consciousness of itself as the kind of machine it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a different kind of thing.
You're a different consciousness of self.
I'm a different consciousness. And when I want to talk about my granddaughter or my feelings of, I'm experiencing personally through my daughter had a child, and I'm experiencing a kind of reliving of my love for her, my motherhood, the way I see her doing what I did as a mother. I mean, I'm experiencing feelings that are a blessing to me, that I'm experiencing these feelings.
And they can only be expressed really in poetry.
And to a human.
Yes, and to a human.
That was my point. So let's say this genius AI, it develops self-consciousness. It's like the best AI ever. It has all the information. I want to talk about this. I know in an instant that when I tell you this story,
I understand it.
What AI? An AI didn't have a baby. It didn't have a baby. An AI wasn't a mother or a father, didn't have that experience. Why would I want to discuss this with an AI? No matter how smart it is, no matter how much Jane Austen it's read.
Good point.
So I think the moment is here to clarify who has standing to discuss these things with us.
Given that there are so many trials going on of the former president, and this issue of standing is a very, very big question, I think it's brilliant of you to actually frame it in that kind of legal term. I'd never really understood the word standing until or even heard of it until a few weeks ago, when people started talking about, the sort of how these trials are going to proceed and who has standing. But it's like part of our legal framework to understand how to be in relationship with the various challenges that the law was designed to hold, up to society. And then some arguments don't have any standing. Some people don't have any standing. And so, we can also turn that on its head and say, like, we have standing by virtue of being alive.
Yes.
That's the most important standing. Why don't we honor that? Why don't we put a deep foundation, just as Thoreau said, put a foundation under, the castles that you're building in the sky? Why don't we create that kind of foundation and that kind of standing where we honor that being human is a certain kind of standing, and it has a domain of infinite emotional, dimensionality, infinite cognitive dimensionality, infinite somatic dimensionality, and infinite social interconnectedness dimensionality. And these things have standard by virtue of the fact that we're the ones that are generating all this stuff. And so we can assert in a certain way that it has standing. And if we want to give up that standing to, sort of to machines, that is a certain kind of autoimmune disease of humanity.
It is. I see it as an abdication of a sort of lack of appreciation.
Yeah.
Our deep human nature.
Absolutely. I'm in complete accord with that. I really love this sort of confluence in some sense of the way you're exploring this kind of thing, and how it's emerging in the meditation world, so that people understand that meditation is not some kind of arcane, weird thing from the past that you do and have to believe all sorts of things that, are questionable, but where you like scientifically investigate the most fundamental questions, like, who are you? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be in relationship? And then not answer out of your head, not merely cognitive responses, but a fully embodied responses, many of which might start out with, I have no idea, I don't know, which any great scientist, you have to take everything that you know, a great scientist, you don't want to be, as Krishnamurti put it, be a prisoner of the known. You need to take everything that you know, not be imprisoned by it, and then rest in not knowing long enough for that eureka insight or moment to arise mysteriously, that no one's had this insight before on planet Earth. And that's what great scientists do. And then everybody else says, why didn't I see that? Well, because the causes and conditions have to be just right for you to know everything you know, but not be so imprisoned by the known that you're caught, and then somehow magically a new insight arises and a eureka moment, and then you move from there. And that's what all great scientists know. They're all meditators just by virtue of the fact that they're willing to stay in not knowing.
Yes. And I see the rush to artificial intelligence as a flight from the feeling of not knowing, the intolerability.
The discomfort.
Yes.
See, but that's like exercising a muscle. That's what mindfulness is you're exercising a muscle, and everybody knows nobody wants to go to the gym and work out, right? It's just like boring. I mean, do I have to keep running on this treadmill, or do I have to keep, flexing this, working with this weight that's every time I lift it up? Yes, you do, because there's a certain kind of discipline and a certain kind of convergence of if the weight is the right weight for your arm at the moment or whatever muscle group you're exercising, and you work with it rather than against the weight, then the actual inertia of the weight is growing, well, a deltoid muscle or whatever it is that you're flexing or working with, in a way that, is there some discomfort associated? You bet there is. But if you do it within the boundaries of that discomfort, something starts to grow. Now, with meditation practice, from the outside, it looks like absolutely nothing. You might be, let's say, sitting meditation. You're just sitting there, and from the outside, it looks like this person just been sitting there for an hour, a total waste of time. But actually, what's going on inwardly, you can't tell. Even if you had the person in an fMRI machine, there's no telling what's really going on in there. The technology is so undeveloped compared to the complexity of the human brain. I mean, you've got north of 200 billion neurons, at least that many glial cells, and nobody really knows what they're doing in there anyway, and trillions upon trillions of synaptic connections that are continually changing, even as we're having this conversation and everybody's listening to it, who's listening to it. The brain is taking all of this in, and it's rearranging its very structure, not just its activity, on the basis of this. And when you practice non-doing, when you practice formal meditation, all the studies are suggesting that what looks a lot like nothing from the outside actually winds up driving things called functional connectivity and bringing online different networks in the brain that actually subtend the body, subtend thoughts, subtend emotions, and subtend creativity and imagination. And it's all from non-doing. So the not knowing and the non-doing, when you cultivate those muscles, when you exercise those muscles, in a certain sense, it's an antidote to everything we're talking about and the toxicity of this digital, sort of tsunami that we're experiencing. And I think humanity, as Buckminster Fuller liked to say, this is an all hands on deck moment on Spaceship Earth. He said that 60 or 70 years ago. It's more true now for all sorts of reasons than ever before. And so there's a certain way in which what we're talking about, I like to frame as a love affair. I mean, and I sense that from your work, that I'm guessing now, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you love this stuff. I mean, it comes out in your writing. It's passion. And why do you love it? I'm guessing you love it because you care about what it means to be human. And you see that that is actually being eroded by clever human beings who know how to program machines in a certain way to pretend that they are better than humans. But we haven't exhausted yet what it means to be human, so let's not give it all up just yet, okay? And that's exactly where the meditation traditions are pointing to now, is that we need to understand what it means to be fully human before we abandon our humanity. And that does not mean just understanding it from a cognitive point of view. It means understanding it from an awareness point of view. And no neuroscientist can tell you what awareness is or how it arises from those 3 pounds of neurons in the brain. No one knows how we get to sentience. And I take great comfort in that there's, so much more that we don't know than we do know, and that's where the science and engineering can be profoundly beautiful, but only if we don't do it at the cost of our humanity. And I love that you're continually, in such precise ways, inquiring into what's wrong with this kind of thinking and this kind of surrendering to the technology without questioning what's being lost in a certain way. And so, what more interesting time for us to be alive than this?
Well, I thank you. I feel the same way about the partnership between this moment, which I think I've always thought of it as a break the glass moment, but I like the Buckminster Fuller, all hands on deck. I like that as well. And
Yeah, I
I think
like the break the glass moment,
break the glass moment. I think this
ring
is
the alarm.
I think this is a perfect place to perhaps end our conversation. I think we've come to a place of kind of commitment to the analog deeply understood as embodiment and the life cycle. And I feel very good wonderful about this conversation.
Me too, Sherry. And I really love that we're framing it as an adventure.
Yes.
And that it's fun, and that we really, again, your word reclaiming, whether it's by omission or by commission, we've lost a lot of it in a certain way, and that loss is being accelerated, and we need to actually galvanize and mobilize our energies to reclaim the full dimensionality of our humanity.
And I think it's very important that this moment of reclaiming, and the only thing I regret a little about the word or worry about the word, is not perceived as a moment of nostalgia.
Oh, I don't think anybody perceives
well, if you want to reclaim, claiming the novel, I mean, I'm very forward thinking. And when I'm talking about reclaiming, I'm thinking of thriving forward.
Thriving forward, did you say?
Thriving forward. I'm not thinking of reclaiming some practice, long gone.
Well put.
To thrive forward.
Well put. And I would say, in closing, that I've seen meditation. It took me maybe 40 years to realize it, because meditation's a real discipline. I mean, you have to, as I sometimes put it, get your ass on the cushion, metaphorically and literally, on a regular basis, and keep it there longer than the mind's going to want to stay, because it's going to have all sorts of distractions, including checking your devices and everything else. So it took me about 40 years into my meditation practice to realize that this wasn't just something that I did every morning for an extended period of time, along with working with the body in mindful hatha yoga on the floor. So there's a lot of investment of, energy early in the morning. But it's actually a radical act to stop all the forward motion and drop into the present moment. You can do it lying in bed. You don't even have to get out of bed to do this, but it's not a doing, it's a dropping into being. And I came to realize it's a radical act of sanity, and it's also a radical act of love. And so when I take my seat in the morning, I'm not making a big deal out of this, but it's not, one more thing I have to stick into my day, or I know it's important for me to meditate and I'll be a better person, or I'll be more emotionally balanced or have greater insights. No, it's a love affair with the present moment and the miracle of being alive and being completely interconnected with all reality, really, through the nature of being human, and the mind and the senses and the body and everything else. And that this is a kind of universe that's really calling out for inhabiting in a way that gives rise to our creativity and imagination, and our capacity for love, including our capacity to actually honor ourselves in non-narcissistic ways, but to recognize our own intrinsic beauty. And the Buddhists, the way they would put it is, they would just say, your true nature. Your true nature is no different from the Buddha, and the word Buddha means awaken. So awaken to the actuality of things as they are. And now we're living in this digital analog interface where we need to awaken to both the beauty and the toxicity of and what might be lost, as you're pointing out so beautifully, and then find new and imaginative ways at scale in society and globally to hold this in a way that maximizes well-being for everybody and minimizes harm. And without awareness, we're not even going to know what the harms might be. So just thank you for your willingness to collaborate and engage in this way. I just like feel so honored to talk to you. And I remember hearing you speak for the first time. I went when I was living in Lexington. You came and spoke at a public place in Lexington when the Reclaiming Conversation book came out, and I was smitten from that moment on.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. And I feel the same way. I remember, well, I've heard you for many, many years, and I'm always struck by how in every time you speak and have a group in your thrall, you always have a brief meditation. Could we just do a very brief meditation now?
Thank you. Sure, absolutely. So, for everybody who is here, um, fine to gaze at the screen, but you're also welcome to close your eyes if you want to. You can meditate with your eyes open or closed. But let's establish ourselves, whether you're in a posture, let's put it, that embodies wakefulness and dignity, no matter what hour of the day or night this is happening. And it could be lying down, as I said, or it could be sitting. But if you're sitting in particular in a way where the head is balanced on the neck and shoulders, and the whole of the torso is balanced on the pelvis, and you're sitting in a dignified posture that's erect but not stiff. And then whether your eyes are open or closed, just dropping into a sense of your body as a whole sitting here, breathing in the aftermath of the conversation that you've just listened in on and thus participated in, and just feeling the actual sensations in the body associated with this breath coming into the body and this breath leaving the body. And it could be at the nostrils, or it could be expansion of the belly, or wherever the breath sensations are most vivid for you. But let the body do the breathing. Let the breathing do itself, as opposed to pushing or pulling the breath at all. And your job is to just surf on the waves of sensation in the body, of the breath moving in and out. And letting everything else, thoughts and feelings and the past and the future and your desire to check devices and all of that, just let all that be present if it's present, but be in the wings for now. And realize that you're actually inviting yourself to inhabit the timeless dimensionality of now. And recognizing that in this very moment you are complete. And that you'll never be more complete than you are in this moment. You'll just be older, but you're already whole. No matter what you're carrying, no matter what you may be suffering from at this particular moment, inwardly or outwardly, still the validity of this moment is complete. And you can be in open-hearted and wise relationship to it. And learn through practice, through ongoing cultivation, to inhabit the domain of human awareness. It's a space that you can take up residency in. And I invite you to do that right now, not by doing anything, but by simply dropping into being and falling awake. So you can let awareness become your default mode, so to speak, or your domicile, your address. And then the beauty of mindfulness in everyday life is that every moment is worthy of inhabiting with full awareness, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And the more we learn to show up in our lives in this way, the more we cultivate wisdom, discernment, and a capacity to act in a way that embodies wakefulness, wisdom, clarity, and a sense of honoring the mystery of being alive and belonging to the society of life on planet Earth in this moment. And awareness is, as we were saying, so big that it can hold all this effortlessly without any striving. And underneath all the words, in a certain kind of silence that is your ally and friend, and deeply associated with your original nature, your original beauty. Where you're absolutely complete in this very moment. Absolutely complete. And I would say in closing that, we're at a moment when the world really needs all its flowers. And you are one. So let your intrinsic beauty be available to whatever degree feels safe to you. And give yourself over as best you can to the love affair of living life as if it really, 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 really mattered. So that would be my offering at this particular juncture.
I'm so grateful. Thank you very much.
I'm so
Thank you.
grateful that you invited me to do that.
Well, till the next time, Jon, I look forward to it.
Absolutely, absolutely, Sherry. I wish you well in all ways, and I really look forward to the next time our paths cross.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And Steve, I want to thank you for hosting this and encouraging us to get together to do it. And just a deep bow to you for Wisdom Feed and everything that you're doing in the world.
That's what I took so many notes. I've never taken, I mean, everything was just so profound. And Sherry, you talked about something in the first conversation, the idea of necessary conversations. And this is a necessary conversation in this world, that is out of balance. And
Right.
so
And I think what's so great about talking with Jon is that is I think that people have rote conversations about this in which you know what everybody's going to say. You know, when I'm invited to speak in an engineering class at MIT, it's as though, here she comes.
Right, it's all predictable.
There they
But it
go.
isn't.
Here she comes. And what I really think is wonderful about our conversation, Jon, is that it always feels to me surprising and enlivening, and I learn so much, and I'm just grateful for it. So
Well, thank you.
I also am a great fan, as you can tell.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Steve. Honestly, a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful.
And remember, once we are offline, so it's not being recorded, send me your mailing address and I'll put a book in your mail.
Yes, I will. I will. Absolutely. Okay. Bye-bye, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Till
you both.
soon. Till soon, I hope, for all of you.
And
Bye-bye.
safe travels,
Thank you.
and all the best with your work moving into the world. Anything that I can do to be of use to you, I'm here for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
All right,
much.
that was
Bye
wonderful.
for now.
Thanks so much. All right. See you next time.